I asked my children why they were seizing my company, and my son replied, "Because that's what you taught us, that legacy is more important than family." My name is Elara, and I was once the queen of the Parisian fashion world. But the empire I spent my entire life building, Maison Elara, was on the brink of collapse due to my own arrogant decisions. In my desperation, I did something I never thought I would have to do. I invited my two estranged children to a fateful dinner to beg for their help. Leo, my eldest son, is an artisan who had cut off all contact with me for 20 years. And Clara, my youngest daughter, possesses a professional coldness that is a direct reflection of my own. I thought I was setting the stage for my salvation. I had no idea that they had already set a stage of their own. Instead of offering comfort, they placed a stack of contracts on the table. They hadn't come to save me, they had come to take over. They revealed that they had been quietly acquiring my entire company for months. And when I asked why, my son, Leo, looked me directly in the eyes and said they were only doing exactly what I had taught them, that legacy and career are eternal, while family is just a burden. And just like that, I had to sign my name, handing over my entire empire to the very children I had sacrificed for its sake. This is not my success story. This is the story of how my own cruelest lessons came back to destroy me. It all began on an autumn evening a few years ago. At that time, my empire was teetering on the brink. Other fashion houses might crumble, eroded by time, made irrelevant by changing trends, or forgotten for designs that no one spoke of anymore. But Maison Elara was not collapsing for any of those reasons. It was rotting from within, consumed by fissures I had never seen, and by a betrayal I could never have imagined. I stood in my luxurious penthouse, where the warm golden light still illuminated the silk, wood, and crystal, as if nothing at all had changed. But on the marble table, which was once piled high with sketches that smelled of fresh ink and carried the promise of a brilliant future, now lay nothing but scattered notices of debt. I stared at them, feeling as though each bolded number was poised to devour my name itself. I had gambled everything on a single, massive contract, a deal with a foreign investment group that promised to launch Maison Elara onto the global stage. But it was a trap. They vanished with an immense sum of money, leaving me alone in the wreckage. The ateliers went unpaid. The silk suppliers threatened to sue. The reputation I had spent a lifetime building was now on the verge of being destroyed. It was over. It was all over. The thought repeated in my mind, as cold as a final verdict. Maison Elara, a name once synonymous with elegance and power, was now about to be reduced to ashes. My hand trembled as I held my wine glass. The crimson liquid swirled, yet it was a bitter taste that caught in my throat. On the mantelpiece, two old photographs seemed to stare down at me. Leo, my eldest son, was an artisan bookbinder living a quiet life in the suburbs, a simple existence that I had once scorned. Clara, my youngest daughter, was cold and pragmatic, a perfect reflection of myself. She was still with the company, but between us, there were only the dry, hollow exchanges of business. They had grown up, becoming successful in their own right, in a way that no longer required me. I hated to admit it, but they were my only hope. The truth of it was suffocating. I, Elara, the woman who had once made all of Paris bow to her now, had to seek pity from the very children I had abandoned. I had no choice but to reach for them, like grasping at the last blade of grass in a storm. I knew there was only one path forward, a path my pride had always forbidden me from taking. I could not lose Maison Elara. It was not just a company, it was my life. It was the very thing I had sacrificed my family to build. And now, I had to call them. I had to set my self-respect aside and beg. I could only hope that, somewhere in the hearts of Leo and Clara, there was still something left for their mother. I took a deep breath, setting my pride aside. I decided to call Clara first. That call, at least, felt like a business exchange, something I was familiar with. Easier than confronting an old wound, I told myself. The phone rang only once before she answered. Her voice was as cold as ice, completely devoid of emotion. "What do you need?" There was no greeting, no question of how I was, just a question straight to the point. A bitter thought crossed my mind. She had learned that from me. "Clara," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "I want to invite you to dinner on Saturday evening." Leo as well. A special family dinner. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. What does she want now? Is this about money again? She was probably weighing whether an evening of her time was worth whatever I was about to ask. Very well. 7 o'clock, she replied, her voice flat, as if she were confirming an appointment with a business partner. I ended the call, feeling a sliver of relief that it was done, yet completely empty inside. The call to Leo was different. That was the call I had been avoiding for 20 years. My hand was shaking as I scrolled to his number in my contacts, a number I had never had the heart to delete. It took me several minutes to summon all my courage, to battle the fear of rejection, before I finally pressed the call button. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring felt like a judgment, a reminder of the silence I myself had created. I was about to hang up, thinking it was a foolish idea, when a voice finally answered. His voice was unfamiliar and hard, holding none of the warmth of the boy I once knew. Is there a reason for your call? He didn't even call me mother. A sharp pain pierced my chest. Leo, I began, I want to invite you to dinner. On Saturday. With Clara. I could feel his resistance in the silence that followed. And then, out of pure desperation, I told a cruel lie. Perhaps this will be our last dinner together. Another long, heavy silence. I was sure he would refuse. But finally he spoke a single sentence. I'll be there. And he hung up. I put the phone down, filled with bitterness and self-loathing. I had lied. I had resorted to using the frailty of old age to manipulate my own son. I hadn't invited them to reconcile. A family that had been shattered for 20 years couldn't be mended over a single dinner. I had invited them to beg, to save the only thing I had left to care about, my legacy. On Saturday night, I transformed my apartment into a stage. The dining table was lavishly set with the finest silverware, flickering candles, and the elaborate dishes they had both loved so much as children. It was the perfect set for my final act. Clara arrived first, punctually at 7. She wore an elegant black dress, her makeup flawless but her face impassive. She greeted me with a cool formality, then sat down and gazed silently out the window. 15 minutes later, Leo arrived. He was dressed in a simple sweater, looking thinner and more austere than he did in photographs. He stood in the doorway, seeming completely out of place amidst the luxury. He nodded a greeting to me, then sat in the chair opposite Clara. They didn't speak to each other. Not a single word. A heavy silence filled the room, a silence that was more dreadful than when I was alone. I tried to break it. I attempted to stir up old memories, hoping to find some of the warmth that had been lost. Leo, I began, do you remember the garden behind our old house? You built a tree house there once, remember? Leo, who had been staring down at his plate, looked up. His eyes were cold. I don't remember, he cut in. Just get to the point. I don't have much time. His words were like a splash of cold water to my face. I glanced over at Clara, hoping for a hint of sympathy, but she simply shrugged, as if to say, I told you so. Their coldness was more terrifying than any letter of demand, I thought. I had spent my entire life building an empire, only to fail at building a family. I realized then that I had never truly known my children. I only knew the perfect versions of them I had tried to mold the people I had wanted them to become. And now, facing these strangers, I felt utterly alone. Leo's cold words shattered my final defense. The wall of arrogance I had erected over so many years came crumbling down. I could no longer play the part of the powerful matriarch hosting a family dinner. The charade was over. I broke. I set my knife and fork down, their clatter against the porcelain plate sounding jarring in the silence. I looked at the two unfamiliar faces of my children, and for the first time in years, I allowed my vulnerability to show. The tears I had suppressed for weeks began to fall. Maison Elara, I began, my voice trembling and broken. It is about to collapse. Both of them looked up. For the first time that evening, I saw genuine attention in their eyes, but it was not concern. It was curiosity. I was deceived, I continued, tears streaming down my face. A massive contract. It was all a trap. They took everything. I need your help. I looked at them, from one to the other, my gaze pleading a plea I had never made to anyone in my entire life. I need money, a great deal of money, to save it, to save our family's name, to save everything I have built. I held my breath, waiting for a shred of pity, a word of blame, anything that resembled a human reaction. But what I received was worse than silence. It was indifference. Leo and Clara looked at each other. It was a brief glance, but it was enough for me to know that I was no longer in control of anything. Clara placed her handbag on the table, and from it she pulled a thick file of documents. "We know," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "We have known about the corporation deceiving you for 6 months." I was stunned. My heart seemed to stop. "What? What did you just say? 6 months ago?" Leo spoke next, his voice thick, no longer with anger, but heavy with a deep sorrow. "While you were chasing empty promises, you did not see that everything was collapsing. We saw it clearly. We saw your artisans being abandoned. We saw the suppliers losing their faith. But you just kept believing in your global dream." His words were like knives twisting in my heart. I could not believe it. They had known. They had known everything, but they had said nothing. They had given no warning. They had not extended a hand to pull me from the mire. They let me fall. Let me lose everything. Let me face this humiliation all by myself. "You," my voice was hoarse, as if caught in my throat. "You knew everything, and you let me sink, let me be played for a fool. And now you have come here to take what little is left." Clara did not answer right away. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Leo avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clenched as if he were hiding a secret. A pain shot through me, sharp and deep. It wasn't because I was losing the brand, not because I was facing bankruptcy, but because the betrayal came from my own flesh and blood. I raised them with my entire youth. I taught them every stitch, and I had believed that if I ever fell, they would at least be there to catch me. But it turned out, those same hands had been busy signing the very contracts that were pushing me to the bottom. My thoughts suddenly turned to the artisans who had been with me for decades. They believed in me. They believed that Maison Elara would always be their place of work, their home. And now, that very home was being seized by my own children. I sat in silence. The documents before me were no longer business papers. They were a verdict. And the ones delivering the sentence were none other than the children in whom I had once placed all my trust. Clara folded her hands, her voice as steady as if she were reading from an indictment. "Do you remember? When I was 10, I invited you to my first violin recital. I stood in the wings waiting for you, minute after minute. But you never came. You told me that your meeting with the investors couldn't be rescheduled. That night, after my performance, I scanned the auditorium and saw only the empty chair that was meant for you." She paused, then let out a slow breath. "I told myself that you must be busy. Then, I told myself that you would probably never be free for me." Leo spoke up as well, his voice heavier. "And do you remember my 16th birthday? I called you just to tell you about the first book I had ever finished in a single night. You cut me off, telling me not to bother you because you were on a more important call. That's when I understood. You never considered my joy to be important." I sat there, stunned into silence, my hands clenched into fists. Clara continued, her eyes boring into mine. "Every time we needed you, you disappeared. You taught us that emotions are just a burden. You let us grow up in a cold emptiness. And in that void, we learned how to stand on our own without you." Leo nodded, adding the final, crushing blow. "Now you cry and accuse us of being heartless. But have you ever considered that you were the one who sowed this very indifference in us?" Those words struck me, each sentence opening a door to a memory I would rather have kept sealed forever. I could hear my own voice from the past, cold, firm, extinguishing my children's small desires with a single dry phrase. "Don't bother me. This work is more important." Clara folded her long, slender fingers on the table, her voice steady, without a single tremor, as if she were reading from an indictment that had been prepared long, long ago. "Do you remember? My first violin recital when I was 10. I stood backstage wearing the white dress you bought me, and I kept looking out at the audience, searching for you. But you never came. You said your meeting with the investors couldn't be moved. That night, when I took my final bow, I wasn't looking at the applause. I was looking at the single empty seat in the front row, the one that was meant for you. She paused, letting out a slow breath. At the time, I told myself you were busy, but then I realized you would never have time for me. Leo then spoke, his voice heavy, as if he were pulling a stone from the depths of his soul. "And what about my 16th birthday?" I called, excited to tell you about the first book I had ever read in a single night. You hung up on me. You told me not to bother you because you were on a more important call. In that exact moment, I understood. My joy would never be important enough for you. I sat there, frozen, my hands clenched together under the table. Clara continued, her eyes boring into me, devoid of any sympathy. "You taught us that emotion is just a burden. You taught us that success is measured in numbers, not in hugs. You let us grow up in a cold emptiness, and in that void, we had to learn how to stand on our own, without you." Leo nodded, concluding the verdict. "Now you cry and accuse us of being heartless. But have you ever considered that you were the one who planted the seeds of this indifference in us?" Those words rained down on me. Sentence by sentence, they opened the doors to memories I had tried to slam shut forever. I could hear my own voice echoing from the past, cold, firm, extinguishing every bit of my children's joy with a single dry phrase: "Don't bother me. This work is more important." After those accusations, there was nothing left to say. The truth had been laid bare, naked and painful. I hadn't just failed as a mother. I had succeeded in creating two cold replicas of myself. Clara, her face impassive, pushed the contract toward me. "Sign here," she said, her voice flat, transferring full ownership of Maison Elara to us. She paused, then continued as if granting a mercy. "In return, you will be allowed to keep this penthouse and will receive a stipend sufficient to live on for the rest of your life. You will not lose face in public, but you will lose all control, completely." I looked down at the gold fountain pen she had placed beside the contract. The very pen my husband had given me when I signed the papers to create Maison Elara, a lifetime, an empire. It was all about to end with this same pen. A profound despair washed over me. Everything I had sacrificed, everything I had traded away, was now turning to smoke. Tears began to fall, splashing onto the white paper. I wasn't crying for the loss of my company. I was crying out of regret. Regret for the recitals I had missed, the phone calls I had dismissed, the birthdays I had forgotten. Regret for having taught my children that success was more important than love. This wasn't their revenge. This was justice. I had sown the wind, and now I was reaping the whirlwind. I had no strength left to fight. I had lost at the very game I had created. My hand trembling, I took the pen. The signature Elara, the one that had once granted me power, the one that had been the symbol of an entire empire, now looked so weak and pathetic. Resigned, I signed my name on the paper. A simple stroke of ink, taking everything away. Leo and Clara left immediately after, without a word of farewell, without a single glance back. The door to the apartment closed, and the familiar silence once again enveloped me. The lavish dinner I had so carefully prepared still sat on the table, untouched. Now it had grown cold, a ridiculous sight amidst the chilling luxury. It was in that moment that I truly realized I had lost everything. And now, months later, I am still here. My life now follows a simple routine. The stipend they provide arrives punctually at the beginning of each month. I no longer have to worry about numbers in the red, but this financial freedom feels more like a prison. I still live in this luxurious penthouse, but it is no longer my own. I am merely a tenant. I often stand by the large window, looking down at the Rue Saint-Honoré below. Today, a new Maison Elara flagship store is opening directly across the street. It is brighter, busier, and more luxurious than any store I ever opened. Through the glass, I can see Clara directing her staff. She is wearing a power suit, her hair in a high bun, her posture strong and decisive, a perfect reflection of who I once was, but perhaps even more capable. She is standing exactly where I once stood. A little farther down, at a sidewalk cafe, I see Leo. He is sitting and talking with an old tailor, one of the men who had been with me from the very beginning. His smile is kind and sincere, a smile I have not seen in 20 years. But that smile is not for me. He is listening, truly listening, something I never did for him. They did it. They saved the legacy. They are making it grow, making it better, in their own way. But they did it without me. I turn away from the window, my shadow stretching long across the empty floor. A single, hot tear rolls down my old face. I spent my entire life composing a magnificent symphony in my own name, but in order to finish it, I destroyed the most precious notes of all, my children. Now, that symphony plays on, more beautiful than ever, but the conductor is no longer me. And I have realized that there are some mistakes for which you can never go back, no matter how high a price you pay. It is too late. That is my story. The story of how I had the entire world and then lost it with my own two hands.